What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to another FPL video, the second upload for today, a much requested free hit game week 28 video. I'm going to go through some talking points just in case you're on the fence about using the chip this week or not, and then go into some tinkering, the draft and all that good stuff. So give it a like if you enjoy it, hit that subscribe button if you are new around here as well. So the first thing to talk about is, is it a good week to use it? Are there going to be other opportunities to use the free hit? So I know some people feel like a lot of us are trying to save chips forever. There's only 11 game weeks to go, but they are going to be 11 very important weeks, right? So this week, obviously, game week 28 is a double game week. You might not have many double game week players. The key really is how many of the players on your free hit would you want to keep long term? We're going to talk about that in just a second, because obviously if you do want to keep them long term, then free hitting them in and then back out is not necessarily a great idea. So really, there's kind of four other opportunities you could use the free hit. I mean, you could always use it game week 38 and try and guess the rotation, game week 37 or whatever, right? You can use it any week, but these are probably the most prominent other weeks to use it. So game week 30 is a blank game week for certain teams. Obviously, we now know the FPL site have put all those fixtures into game week 30, or at least removed them from game week 30. And if Everton beat Boreham Wood in the FA Cup, their fixture against Watford will also be off. But I think given that West Ham and Spurs is now on that week, a lot of people have got Arsenal players, maybe Rafinha, Wolves players and stuff like that. It's not going to be necessarily needed. And by the way, you don't have to have 11 players that week. If you've got 9 or 10 quality players, that could be enough to save the free hit. Then you've got 33, which could be a bit of a mini double game week. We don't know quite yet exactly who would go into that week. We might find out more after the FA Cup result tonight, once the draw for the next round's been made. But there's a chance you get there and you don't have quite as many players you want. Game week 36 is going to be a big double game week. If you're not looking to use your triple captain there, or your bench boost or something like that, you could free hit instead. And then obviously you got next week, game week 29. But I just don't see game week 29 being a great free hit, because teams like Liverpool, Arsenal and Spurs, who are all kind of doubling that week, are also kind of good picks for the long term, or at least the medium term. And Spurs and Arsenal playing game week 30 as well. So I don't really see a massive need to free hit in 29. So 28 might be better. So one of the things to think about, like I said, is the popular teams on the free hit, i.e. the players that you're going to put into your free hit squad. What teams do they play for, and would you want them long term anyway? So Chelsea do have a great fixture run. They've got no fixture in game week 30. So I guess if you free hit your Chelsea players in, one thing, you would triple up, I'm sure, but you wouldn't necessarily need or want triple Chelsea in your actual team. So that's not bad, to be honest. And obviously in game week 29, they've only got a single game week anyway, and then they don't play in game week 30. So I don't actually, although a lot of us will be looking at bringing Chelsea players into our actual squads, I don't think free hitting them in and then not having them in 29 is a big deal, because you can always use your transfers later on to bring them in. So yeah, I don't actually mind that too much. Wolves have obviously got a good double game week. They've got good fixtures from 28 all the way to 32, so they're good short-term picks. They play in game week 30, but realistically, the options you can get from Wolves are maybe a little bit weaker now than they were, or look a little bit weaker now than they did over the last couple of weeks. Like Jimenez obviously just been benched. There's so many other attackers that can play in those wide spots, like Hwang, Pedence, Neto's back as well. So there's going to be some rotation there. And obviously defensive-wise, they haven't been doing great recently. And there are lots of other defenders now that people are looking at. So again, free hitting in Wolves players, not having them long-term, not necessarily a bad thing. Same with Aston Villa, to be honest. Their double game week is good. Obviously Ramsey's a good cheap enabler. But realistically, their fixture in game week 30 is not great. It's against Arsenal, and the long-term fixtures are bad too. So I got to be honest, when I first started thinking about this, I didn't think free hit was a great option. But depending on how your team is set up, you might not want a bunch of these players long-term. So it could be the ideal week for your team. Obviously, it's all going to depend on how you're set up. And then Southampton, again, because of what happened in the FA Cup last night, they beat West Ham. That meant their fixture's off in game week 30. So apart from the double game week this week, they got a good fixture in 29 and 31. And obviously players like Broja are good enablers, right? They're cheap options to have up front. But their fixtures kind of long term aren't fantastic after game week 31, at least not worth worrying about. And outside of Broja, do they have a huge amount of options? Livramento possibly, but I don't think the way fixtures are lining up and the way blanks and doubles are lining up, there's going to be space for the likes of Ward, Prowse in our team. So I actually don't think the free hit is a bad option, especially if you've got two. If you've only got one, you might be worth kind of trying to save it a little bit longer. I'm not saying you don't use it this season, but you can just save it a little bit longer. And just some key questions is, I guess, which three Chelsea players you go for? I mean, we all want a triple up, Burnley away and Norwich away, but a lot of the attackers are kind of rotation prone, not necessarily nailed. Reece James, I'm sure, is a defender we all want. Will he definitely start both games? Will Alonso start both games? These are all the questions we'll tackle in a minute when we do a little bit of tinkering. Do you keep Salah? I usually, if there's a big enough, and I would say this week is a big enough double to have 11 double game week players, that is usually what I'll do. But I've got to be honest, Salah is so close to a lot of those players, I'd be very tempted just to keep him in. I just think, I know it's West Ham at home, it's not the most perfect fixture. If it was like, I don't know, Watford at home or Norwich at home, you'd absolutely keep Salah in. So there is a question mark over whether you have him. I just don't know if there's enough quality attackers or even defenders to warrant leaving him out, especially when he's going to be so highly owned. The only thing, of course, is he's probably not going to be heavily captained this week, so he's not going to be over 100% effective ownership. And I'm not saying you should make decisions based on that anyway, but I do think when it's close, like it is this week, I would often side on, on the side of caution, basically, and just have him in. And yeah, I guess in general, are there any other single game week players you have? Or is it literally just Salah plus 10 double game weekers or 11 double game weekers total? So players like Son and Kane have got Everton at home that aren't that bad. But to be honest with you, when I've looked through drafts and stuff like that, there's not really a huge amount of other single game week players I'd want this week. So I'd go pretty much double and probably keep Salah. Let's take a look at the draft. Alright, so this is kind of our starter draft, right? I'm going to talk around some of the players that I've picked and then talk about some other players that aren't included here, because obviously anyone I don't include, there'll always be someone that says, why didn't you speak about this player? And they'll say it even if I have spoken about them, but we'll try our best anyway. And really quickly, the website used, as on screen, is just fpl.team. Like fpl.com, but instead of com, it's team. fpl.team. Doesn't matter how many times I say it, people still ask me what the website's called. It's even written on the screen right now. Okay, so this has got triple Chelsea. I've got to be honest, I think the three Chelsea players you pick is pretty difficult, right? If I was going for safe picks, then I think it'd probably be Rudiger, Mount, and then maybe one other. Maybe Thiago Silva, maybe James, maybe Alonso. I've put Rudiger in because I think he's absolutely the best chance of getting two back-to-back starts. I know Thiago Silva, I've looked into it, hasn't missed many minutes. Okay, over Christmas he missed about 38 minutes in one game and then was off or out of the squad for the next game because he had a knee injury. So maybe the fact that he played so many minutes meant that the injury occurred, but realistically he's starting a lot, so he could be an option, but he's not that exciting for me. So I think you go for Rudiger and try and get one of the other attacking defenders. I've got to be honest, I don't know if Marcus Alonso is being talked about enough. Now, I know I've been burnt before, and I'm not saying he's a long-term pick, but he surely has as good a chance as anyone to play back-to-back Burnley and Norwich. The big issue is, what if they play four at the back? Will they just play Sarr as a left-back instead of playing Alonso as a left-back, right? He usually gets used in a wing-back system. But if James is back, they've got enough centre-backs, why wouldn't they just play wing-backs against both of these teams? It's their normal style. It's their normal go-to formation. And Alonso's not just coming back off the long-term injury. He's played some important, I can't get my words out, some important games recently. And I got to be honest, right, I'm not saying he was brilliant, but I thought he was fine against Liverpool. He didn't have huge issues against Salah or anything like that for like the whole game. And I think he did fine. So I think he's got a chance of playing back-to-back. And the Maverick FPL managers out there could go for James and Alonso. I think we have to just accept that James is a risk. He's not necessarily going to play back-to-back twice. What Tuchel has said about him was they only wanted him to play about 20 minutes in the FA Cup and he played 70, so he was overloaded. But then we don't know whether the 15 minutes against Luton was what they were intending or whether they wanted him to start that game and then he couldn't start because he played so much in the FA Cup. We just don't know. But he's so good that I'd think about risking it. The problem, of course, is he could just play one, and you're not going to get anyone off the bench because he's played some minutes in one of the games. But I think I'd do that. And then in attack, Mount is probably the most nailed option. But Havertz has started a lot of games recently, and it was very telling that he got a rest in the FA Cup and Lukaku started. I don't think that was to get Lukaku up to scratch or anything like that. I think it was because Havertz is currently the first choice number 9. Now, again, whether or not I think he's the first choice number 9 and going to get enough minutes in the long term to bring him into my team or anything like that. I'm not so sure. But as a 1 week punt against Burnley away and Norwich away, that seems pretty nice. Obviously, the reverse fixture was 7-0 to Chelsea against Norwich, and Havertz got 0 returns. But you can't base your decisions on that, right? Another game, another day, he gets some goals, he gets some assists or whatever, combination of both. So I think that's kind of like maybe the Maverick way. If you wanted to go a bit safer, maybe just Rudiger and Mount and then get a different defender in. But I think with the 2 fixtures, you kind of want triple Chelsea. You could even go triple defence if you wanted to. You could go for Rudiger, James and Alonso, or Rudiger, James and Thiago Silva, or whatever, a combination of those 3. But I think Rudiger has to be in there. The kind of question marks for me, let's go for the other nailed players. I think Rafinha would definitely be in for me. I'd pretty much have at least one Southampton forward, because I just think Villa away and Newcastle home is pretty decent. They're also playing really well. And there's such a lack of kind of forward options this week, especially with a double game week, that I don't see too much harm in having both of them, have Broja and Adams, right? They're both starting regularly at the moment. They're both part of a team that's doing well. I'd probably have them both in. The other options are obviously Jimenez, but a lot of people are now worried because he got benched recently. Doesn't mean he's going to get benched in both these games, but I think he's got, in either of these games, I think he's only got like 2 goals since game week 13, which is pretty crazy. But I'm looking at my list of kind of other options. You've got Chris Wood, possibly against Brighton at home, Southampton away could be an option. You've got Ings and Watkins, obviously got the same fixtures as Coutinho, Southampton at home and Leeds away. But I just wonder if they're both going to keep on starting. That's probably what I would do. I think you just got to be careful you don't get into a situation where you've got a lot of players in the team that are all risks for minutes, because then it kind of hurts the free hit a little bit. But you could go, instead of Jimenez, just go for someone like Danny Ings instead, and just hope against pretty good fixtures, Southampton at home, Leeds away, that he does the business. Jimenez is just like not that exciting, but up until last week we would have said definitely going to play both games, definitely going to play 90 minutes and on penalties as well. I don't know if I can still say that. So going for a different striker might be a bit more interesting. Again, I think I'd have Coutinho. I don't necessarily see him as a long-term pick at this point, but I think for the fixtures he's got, for this double game week, he's a pretty good midfielder. And like I said, I probably would have Salah in there as well. The other question mark, and again, it's more kind of Wolves stuff, and I've just realised I couldn't have Cody, Saiss and Sarr and Jimenez, right? So that's a mistake from me. But you could just remove Cody for a different player on the bench, because that's 4 Wolves players. Yeah, the double defence, the problem with kind of double game week players, the only other option really I see is like Luka Dean or going for a Newcastle defender, just to kind of maybe spread the risk a little bit. But I think Crystal Palace at home and Watford at home are such good fixtures, and although Wolves haven't been great recently, you'd think these are the kind of fixtures where they might be able to turn it around. So I actually quite like the double up in defence. I don't necessarily like a double up in attack. I think it's just too risky with Wolves. There's not really enough options that are absolutely nailed. But in defence, I still think it's good. Again, if I wanted to make a change, it probably would just be to put Luka Dean into the side instead of having him on the bench and just having triple Villa. But I don't know. I just look at the fixtures that Villa have got and think Southampton can definitely score. That's why I've got 2 of their forwards in. And I've got Rafinha as well, because I think even with a new manager, Leeds will be just as attacking and just as good in attack. That I'm not sure about clean sheets. And also, if you want to kind of go for the upside play, there's no one from Watford and no one from Crystal Palace in your free hit team. So if Wolves do get a clean sheet, it's huge. Whereas if Luka Dean gets a clean sheet or even 2, it means your forwards are blanked, right? So you could kind of double down and play the upside play and not have any of your attackers kind of playing against any of your defenders. So I think realistically, there's not a huge amount of other stuff that I would do. I think if I really didn't want Ings and I didn't want Jimenez, you could potentially put another midfielder in instead of Ings, right? So you could go for Son, but I guess there's someone like Ward-Prowse could go in, but then you're on like triple Southampton attack, and as well as they've been playing, I'm not sure that's something I'd want to do. So maybe if you wanted to kind of take one of the forwards out instead, you could put like Chris Wood in or something like that. Just to, I don't know. I always think to myself, if one player is a good option and the other player is a good option, it doesn't matter that they play for the same team. But triple Southampton attack, if they just have an off day, or for whatever reason that Villa and Newcastle defences just play out of this world and stop them from scoring, that's 3 players you got blanking on a free hit. I just don't think it's worth it. Like, Man City players, for example, or Liverpool players on a free hit, maybe you'd want to triple up on attack. Obviously, we won't get into conversations about Trent, etc., but you kind of get the point I'm making. It could be worth it. I'm just not sure it is for for Southampton. So I think that's kind of what I would think about doing. If I wanted Ward-Prowse in there and one forward, because obviously Ward-Prowse takes penalties, then I'd maybe switch one of the attackers to like Chris Wood or Jimenez or Ings, whichever kind of way you want to go around it. But for me, the players that are nailed, I think I'd definitely have Coutinho. I'd pretty much have Sarr as well. I'd definitely have Rudiger, Rafinha. I think I'd keep Salah in there as well. And I'd have a Southampton attacker. Everything else is kind of up for grabs, I think. There's no really other single game week players I'd have. I'd have Seiss, Rudiger, James, Luka Dean, all of them ahead of Trent Alexander-Arnold, in my opinion. It's only Salah that I would probably put in with a single game. You could, like I said, you could change him, put someone else in if you want to, but I think that's what I'd do. I guess one quickly last thing is the triple up on Chelsea. You could go for 2 attackers, 1 defender. I just think there's so much value in the Chelsea defence. They're such a good defence. Like, you could genuinely rely on them to get 2 clean sheets here, whereas Havertz and Mount just doesn't seem as exciting. I don't know what it is about Chelsea. I mean, they've put 7 goals past Norwich earlier on in this season. And they do score plenty of goals. They do. I remember people saying earlier in the season they don't, and I looked at it, and they do score plenty of goals. But I just think the way the fixtures are kind of laid out, and obviously you've got to consider other options. Like if you take out a Chelsea defender for another attacker, then you've got to put a defender from one of these teams in instead, and I'm just not sure I would do it. And although I just said one last thing, I'm going to go for one more last thing. If you wanted to go for a punt up front, then the player I think, like, I'm not saying that Chris Wood or Che Adams are really massively owned, right? They could really be in punt territory, but people are talking about them. One player that's not being talked about very much is Rodrigo for Leeds. Now, obviously, we don't quite know what formation is going to be played or whether he'll definitely play. But with Bamford still out, you'd assume he'll be in the side. And Leicester away, Villa at home, they're not bad fixtures. It does mean a double up on Leeds attack. And again, I appreciate a lot of people won't want to do that. And Rafinha would still be my number 1 Leeds player for sure. But Rodrigo, if you want to do something a bit different, I would just be careful about talking yourself into that too many times. I'll just go for a punt here, I'll go for a punt there, and suddenly 5 out of 11 of your players are a little bit risky for minutes, or just maybe not even that great of an option to start with. So just be careful. But yeah, that's my thoughts on free hit. Let me know what you're doing this week. Are you going for the free hit? What does your team look like? Are there any players I've missed out? I think I've covered most of it. If you enjoyed it, give it a like, hit that subscribe button, and I'll be back tomorrow with some more videos.